Okay, I am here with Dimitri, aka Back the Bunny. And after many DMs and many flirtations online, we're finally able to sit down and talk. So, Dimitri, first off, you are being trafficked through Europe somewhere, I take from your messages.
Yes, yes, but I don't think you can traffic the willing, so it's a friendly trafficking, but yeah.
So they're treating you well, these hostage takers.
They are. The Stockholm syndrome is setting in nicely. In fact, I visited Stockholm while I was here, so there you go.
How was that?
It was really nice. I enjoyed it immensely, and I like cold environments too. In Stockholm in November, I particularly thought was just gorgeous, wandering around that during the day, just pondering, reflecting, soaking it in. So I thought Stockholm was gorgeous.
Let me ask you, are you from the States?
Yeah, yeah.
What was the main difference you saw culturally being over there between like being in the States, I guess?
Um, I'll touch on it aesthetically first because that's the most prominent thing. I mean, you can just feel and I didn't have these like edgy, takes before I went to Europe about like, America versus Europe. I think it's kind of in vogue for people to shit on where they're from and think everywhere else is cooler. And I certainly don't think that about the US overall. But the architecture, though, and just the aesthetics and layout are so overwhelmingly superior in most parts of Europe. It's just only some small parts in Bucharest and only Bucharest actually comes to mind, and not even all of it, just parts of it were kind of comparably ugly to the U.S. So just like they build things to be, you can tell the cities are older and they're built to be like beautiful to look at. They are like respect it in a holistic way. It's not just a box of a room you enter to do your business then leave. So
Yeah.
I deeply like appreciate that. Like my favorite thing to do when I visit Europe is frankly put in a podcast or some sort of music on loop and walk around that architecture and that kind of scenery. So that first and foremost, I just think their environments are vastly superior just from like a not to be like cringe about it, but like a human inspiration standpoint, right? Like it's just nicer to be around. And culturally, kind of depends where you are. In the West, in the Western parts of Europe, we definitely have a lot of influence, a surprising amount. Like they're referencing our Netflix shows, they're referencing US events. Like they're talking about us in a way I wouldn't have expected. And when I went there too, I like didn't expect them to know any US references, and they did. So not a huge difference. Sorry, there's a cat here with me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like um, not a huge, not a substantially noticeable difference there. But on the eastern side, yeah, they do feel a little bit different, personal wise. So, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. All right. So, a part of the reason we're speaking is because I think pretty similarly to you, where lots of things seem to happen in patterns. And the reason I think they happen in patterns is because they're working within systems, sometimes like multiple at a time or whatever. But I kind of wanted to I want to take like some big broad questions and kind of let you narrow them down as we go. But why do you think we see patterns everywhere? Like you write about this a lot,
I
like
I do.
biofoundationalism. You talk about physics, and you also had one other third one under your hierarchy, if I recall. But it's not thermodynamics; that's within physics.
Yeah, yeah. I think I know the essay you're talking about. When I was talking about the hierarchy of natural laws, is that
Yeah.
the essay you're referring to? Oh, interesting. Yeah, you read that one. Okay. Um, so if I elaborate on that, I don't think it speaks to the pattern question. On the pattern question writ large, I mean, why are there those everywhere? I think that's almost more of a spiritual question or a complex adaptive system question. I'm not sure why they exist in such a consistent manner, but they do. And more so when I am kind of why I emphasize the repetitiveness of a lot of things or abstract, say, seemingly unrelated patterns. So, a great example of this is my mid range jumpers for the middle class essay and globalism focus
Uh-huh.
and Moneyball. Globalism and Moneyball seem like different things. Like, what are you talking about? One's a way to trade with your partners writ large over the globe. Another one is a form of maximizing point output in a sporting game. But they are the same sort of expected value thinking that clusters around dominant strategies that crushes the middle and amplifies power loss. And if you look at like the NBA shot chart, it's all 3 pointers now, or it's all post shots. The mid range jumper is like gone from the top 100 shots in the NBA, completely gone, because its expected value is not as good as a 3 pointer or the short or the close shot. So now the NBA has this clustering effect of just these two things, and the middle is gone. You see the same thing with globalism, and what we see with the on the US's side, what has happened with these clustering effects with outsourcing, productivity or factories and things like that in manufacturing, and what that's done to amplifying power laws, because it's like technically a dominant strategy, but it crushes variance, it crushes the middle. And you're getting like more points, you're getting more GDP output, right? Like if your North Star is just a higher GDP number and your North Star is just one more point at the end of the game, these are the thing you do. But you kill the same thing when you kind of think that way. So I'm a big fan of spotting this kind of pattern type thinking in a lot of levels, and I think we see a lot of these behaviors. We're aware of like the strong men, weak times, good times. Strong men, hard times, strong men, good times, weak men kind of pattern, and why that manifests. And that, you know, uh, when I get exposed to like certain things in respect to biochemistry or brain scans or like the structural neurological differences of conservatives and liberals, like at a core level, and really start looking at these systems and these expressions of these political views, not as political views, but as forms of moral expressions. And then when I see that these moral expressions can be correlated with brain scans and the size of an amygdala and the activity in your insula in your brain, I don't see someone who comes to these conclusions based off the books they read. I see something with a biological foundation, biofoundationalism. That's where the name comes from. And the expression of this stuff clearly operates in a cyclical way. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. We have a lot of these like cute sayings that touch on like, hey, patterns happen all the time, but it's like we disregard them, or like we just don't take them seriously. And like, all right, anyways, let's discuss the topic of the day. Like this was super important and obviously will change the trajectory of everything. And it's like, no, no, it won't. What changes the real trajectory of these things are fundamentally environmental patterns and things that humans don't control in the way that they think they do. They certainly don't have agency over a complex adaptive system. It's inverted. The system has agency over them, though we can work to change our environments over time. Um, and I don't want to go too much of a tangent. I hope I'm answering your question, but like there are just ways to spot these cyclical behaviors and these patterns that crop up in a lot of different ways that I think have a massive amount of value if we take them seriously. And was really reinforced this more than anything is when I started to deeply like really understand how AI works
Uh-huh.
and how neural networks and machine learning is operating and how they are doing what they're doing. And where does the name neural network come from? Neural, right? I mean, we designed them after our own brains. And so,
Sure.
like to me, when people have the question of like, will AGI exist, or is this actual intelligence? My question is almost like, well, why wouldn't it? Like,
Well,
what are
the
we?
question is, why aren't you artificial intelligence, basically? Like you can flip it around, which is like, what makes you think that you are not just a fucking meat robot? Like, what do you think this thing is?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah. I
I'm not saying that there's no spirituality here. I'm just saying like, why is an organism only, what you can't see bacteria and then you acknowledge that they are organisms. Like, uh, what does that have to do with you or a cat? They're so disparate. Actually, like a rock company, like an organization, an army, those are also organisms, and they act like a.
right.
Why do ants both act like individuals and like liquid? Humans do shit all the time.
Right, right. There's
Um,
even actually an economist who's called like it's not called economic physics, but like the patterns of certain behaviors follow the same patterns of like bubbles in a cylinder
I mean,
of human
you
behaviors.
you
There's
just had a cat cross your desk. Do you have multiple cats, or have you at any point?
I do, though this one's not mine. This is a place where I'm saying has a
Sure.
cat, but yes,
But
I've
I'm
always had cats. I
sure
love cats.
I'm sure there are afternoons wherever you live where you look out and you see two or three of them, and somehow they're all lined up in a row like Egyptian pyramids, and the sun is hitting them all at the same angle, and they're all in the same pose. And not one of the cats is even thinking about what the either two cats are doing. And that's just how they do. But people do this shit all the time. You see people yawn basically in unison or at like slight staggers.
Mhm.
We're much more like fungi often, I think, than we are like apes.
Yes. Yeah. Both. I mean, we're much more animalistic than we like to think that we are, and we have much less control over reactions and beliefs that we are very assured are part of our own due diligence and education than would be comfortable to admit. Again, drawing from like the morality being temperamental, which it truly is. I mean, if I can predict, if I can triangulate roughly the size of your amygdala based off your economic views are not your economic views. Your economic views are a temperamental expression. And
Yeah.
we can already do that just without AI. When we stick AI on this stuff, it's going to be disturbing how easy it's going to be to figure out almost everything about you from a brain scan on where you land on a lot of political and moral and economic and all these beliefs that you have. It's like, well, kind of already knew that without even talking to you. What does that mean? If I can figure that out without talking to you, that there's a lot of implications from that, and that is the crux of like the biofoundationalism framework of thinking that if morality is a genotype, then that means political beliefs must be a phenotype,
Right.
and in order to change how a genotype expresses itself, the environment must change. And this is a overarching expression I've had in a lot of essays and in Biofoundationalism, which I haven't published yet to my Substack, actually. They've been on Twitter for a bit, but I'm going to bring them over here soon. Is that the environment dictates the expression, which is true with phenotype expression. The environment changes, a phenotype will change along with it, expresses differently in animals' behavior and animals' cope, things like that exchange along with the environment. So as an environment changes not politically, as an environment changes from its comfort perspectives, from what you need to do to survive, that's a change in environment. That changes the phenotype expression. Why wouldn't it? Is my thought on that. Like, my thinking is like, well, why would you be special? Like,
Well,
I almost don't feel like I need to prove that. I feel like someone needs to disprove that because it happens to every other animal. Why would we be an exception to that? I'll stop there if you have something to say.
Well, what I was going to say is, I mean, COVID was one massive experiment in this, where you took an entire population and you basically greatly reduced their geographical mobility. So they're just like not burning as many calories. We're fucking piping food into them through like all these apps and like a slave class,
Mm,
basically. And like a lot of people got
yeah.
fat, they got depressed. Like a lot of human relationships fell off. It was like very ugly. But of course, it was like,
Yeah.
well, what the fuck did you think would happen? You basically took like all these lions and put them in cages. They're going to get fat. That's how it works.
Yeah. I'm talking about a change in environment though, beyond that. Like that's more of a,
You mean like
it's very easy to discern that.
giving
What I
someone,
mean is,
go ahead.
yeah, what I mean is I'll try to be succinct about this. So you see the masculine and the feminine, right? You see some complements, you see some antagonism, you see that these things are fundamentally like synergistically frenemies, supportive. Like nature created this dyad for a reason, right? Then they are complementary in many ways. They need
Yeah.
each other. They fulfill each other's shortcomings, and they support each other and they help propagate the species. That's a dyad. Dyads are natural phenomena that you need to respect why they're there. And when I see, the conservative and liberal voting distributions, and they're so beautifully split so evenly, isn't it just poetically so evenly split? It's like, okay, clearly this is not some kind of distribution of like, well, this half saw this news, and this half saw this news, and this half read these books, and this half, like, no, that's not what we're talking about here. Like, let's be serious. Why we're seeing an expression writ large from a system, a society of people that's expressing itself so cleanly in a dyad type way. So I see that and I think, okay, these political belief systems are not, I mean, they're both enemies, but they're also necessary. Like they're antagonists, productively antagonistic is what they should be. They should be in equilibrium ideally.
Yes.
And so going even further now, if I can figure out if you are liberal from a brain scan, and by that I mean your moral framework exists more around a care harm or fairness cheating moral foundation. And you can see that in brain structure, if how you align on that, or if you exist more on sanctity degradation, authority subversion. These are more conservative moral foundations. If this is distributed so evenly, then that means someone's mind is inherently a conservative mind, and some are more inherently liberal minds, which is the same. Mapping this on further, some are more masculine minded and some are more feminine minded. And I don't say feminine minded pejorative. I'm not trying to call like liberals like cucks or feminine. I'm
No,
not trying to
no.
make that
I
statement.
mean,
I mean productively like dyads in that kind of way.
I understand what you're
So
saying. So, look, I live in
yeah.
Texas now. I spent the whole part of my life up until like 4 years ago on the East Coast, Miami, DC, New York. Okay. Obviously, the culture is extremely different between living in New York City and basically like any part of Texas, including Austin, just because like you're not in this like place that's so population dense that like one of the things people don't understand about New York and people, I mean, they're starting to see a little bit of this, but New York will never be as dangerous as many other places, or I don't think it will, purely due to the population density. It's hard to go somewhere where people don't see you and you're not on camera. Okay. All right. So after a slight technical difficulty, we're back. Um, as I was saying, I've lived on the East Coast for like 30 some odd years, and I've only been here in Texas for a little bit. But there are like these cultural attitudes that are different. And one of the things that I think is different or that makes the cultural attitudes different is basically the way the city's laid out. Once you hit a certain level of population density and surveillance cameras and real estate pressure, it's very hard to do things like hate crimes. Like you can do them, they happen. For sure, there's like some Hasids and some like 90-year-old Asian ladies getting their ass kicked, which you can like, go watch on X or whatever. But it's like not it's not Stonewall out there every day on like the Lower West Side or whatever. People aren't just getting hate crimes left and right. Versus it is actually more possible if you're in a somewhat population dense, but like maybe poorer place without so many surveillance cameras. And like, I've just never noticed a a really gay friendly place that was in total poverty, for instance. Like you don't see a place where you
Yeah.
can hold hands and kiss your boyfriend on
Yeah.
where there's like
Yeah.
open sewers and shit happening. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I say to some of my liberal friends, maybe in language they don't like, but like you have to bribe these people. Like you got to close the sewers before you start dumping out like USAID, like queer identification pamphlets and shit. Like you need a couple decades of like taking care of these people. And it's not actually quite bribery, but like for instance, I have a friend who he's currently a law enforcement officer, but he was in the Marines for a while, and we lived together in DC. And I can remember walking down the street with him and another friend of mine whose brother's gay and like this open, obviously. And this guy laughed when he saw like two guys kiss on the lips for the first time. And we looked at him like, oh, you're out of your fucking mind. But the point being, like, well, we were really just city cats. And he was from like the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And like, guess what? That got rinsed off him like immediately because he just understood if he wanted to be like a member of society and like actually get hired for like a real job, he like better stop sniggering and like making fun of it. So he did.
Yeah. 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 And your observation is consistent with another. This is a framework within biofoundationalism, and I promise it's not as layered as it sounds. Maybe it is, but it's not as like it follows if you pay attention to like the core theme here. And this is called more. I call this moral foundations utility theory. It is born off of John Haidt's Moral Foundations,
Uh-huh.
he's
I'm
well known for
familiar.
that work, and he's been the most influential probably for me, and not on any of the brain scan stuff. Though he has talked on some of the physical responses that conservatives have. Like they're more sensitive to puffs of air in the ear. They have quicker reactions to like tactile things. They have a quicker threat response fundamentally, which makes sense
I am always
when you
on the
think
fucking
about.
edge. My wife will tell you.
Yeah,
Like, I am
yeah,
always
yeah, yeah.
like, I don't like people around me. I don't like blind spots. I like to sit with my back to the wall. If people sneak up on me, if they touch me, if they stand over me, I get very nasty very fast. Yeah.
So what I would just then, and the reason you see this, and you see this across all Western nations and wealthy nations, The utility of political beliefs, the utility of moral foundations framework. So I want you to picture a war-torn environment, a poor environment, an environment where you can't fuck around, an environment where you need to amass resources. Your concern is fundamentally some form of survival or well-being, or trying to prosper in some way. Things aren't easy. Okay. The morality will orient around authority subversion. You need hierarchies. You need to create structures for order. If you don't have order, you cannot create any kind of societal framework to amass resources to succeed, to prosper. Conservative beliefs have higher utility fundamentally in
Right.
those environments. The loyalty moral foundation, loyalty, authority subversion, and loyalty betrayal loyalty. You need to be loyal to the group. You need to have certain things that allow people to behave in a high trust manner, to let them do things productively to gain resources. So more the moral foundations, the conservative beliefs have more use in tougher environments, war torn, poor, etc. As you instantiate your moral beliefs well, I'm sorry, as you fulfill the masculine conservative moral foundations correctly and productively, you amass resources. Then you get to be less concerned with, well, how do I survive and how do we create this hierarchy? Well, we have these resources. How do we distribute them? This part of society needs some help. You can begin to have these concerns you could not have if you were not otherwise comfortable. This is more of the feminine creeping in. And I don't say creeping in a pejorative way. It's a sign of success. Like, it's a good problem to have, to be concerned about resource distribution. It means you have resources, right?
Right.
You can't be concerned about it if you're poor. And then you see the utility of the liberal moral foundations, the more feminine moral foundations: care, harm, fairness, cheating. Is this fair? Are we distributing? Are we helping this? And no, feminine-minded things are more distribution-oriented. This is part of what an essay I call masculine because you have to, feminine because you get to. You
Yeah, yeah,
have to
I'm
have those
familiar. Like
masculine conservative foundations. Yeah.
a quick way of putting it would be that your ability to take your top off at a pride parade is basically enforced at the end of a gun barrel, where a guy knows that if he reaches for your boobie, that he's going to end up in the back of a squad car at best. That's why you can prance around with your top off. At the same time, the same people who would like to take their tops off are extremely sensitive to watching guys get thrown in the back of a squad car. And you get Daniel Penny situations where no everyone is just grossed out by any show of force, that it turns into a Boilermaker and it bursts through somehow and everyone's unhappy. But
Yeah. Yeah.
what I was going to say to like kind of dovetail off of something you're saying is I know I think we talked about this. Neither of us is in love with like most economists and how they kind of like
Yeah.
parse things out. But there are some contemporary people who are either economists like Noah Smith right now, or they write things that affect or are trying to affect economic policy, like say Matt Iglesias. And I will tell you, to your point, I think you're being too nice when you just talk about brain scans. Like, again, we're not like, I'm not an Evo Psych person here or whatever, but you can look at some people and make sense of their
Oh, yeah.
political beliefs or
The
things like
the
that.
AI will definitely ascertain that physiognomy has a lot of
Yeah.
truth to it. I'm sure.
So what I was going,
Voice physiognomy is even real. Like, we can
yes. So
triangulate how you look from the. I've written about that. Like,
this
voice
is what I
physiognomy is a
was
real thing. AI can already figure out what you look like a little bit from your voice.
this is what I was going to talk about is I heard Matthew Iglesias's voice for the first time a few months ago. And I was like, holy shit, I understand everything this guy's ever written now. It makes sense from the perspective of someone whose voice is like 2 octaves higher than me. Like,
Yeah.
there is just animals detect this. Your cat and your dog can tell the difference between you and your wife. They know you pet them different, you feed them differently, and when you bark back at them, they have a much different response to a man doing it than a woman.
Almost everything you do is as a bioindicator in some way.
Yeah,
And once we run enough of this through AI, it's going to be very disturbing how easily you are triangulated off like three or four seemingly completely innocuous, superficial things that are uniquely you in a way that you didn't realize.
yeah. In fact, here's one that this is a prediction. I'll put my name, Ancient Problems, on this. I think that one of the traits that can be difficult to pinpoint, that it's hard to tell from physiognomy, maybe I'm wrong on this, is openness. Okay. So disagreeableness you can kind of spot. Like I am a very disagreeable person. I would put money down that you are probably, you're polite, but no one's going to make you say you believe something you don't believe, I don't think.
Mm,
What I was going to say about this is I'm a very open person. And to that end, because I am very open, there are certain liberal ways of looking at the world that I would say I've authentically internalized, but I've had an
mm,
absolutely shit go of assimilating into like proper society because I look and sound like me. And there's
mm,
something about you're in some corporation or in a classroom and you're repeating the pieties they've asked you to repeat. You know them
mm,
inside and out, forward and backwards, and they still treat you like a piece of shit or won't promote you or whatever. And this is them actually doing the AI physiognomy recognition on you. And they're like, he does say, love is love, but he also looks like he can murder everyone in this room with his hands, and you're just not really considered for the next level up. And so it will be interesting to see how all of this gets mediated because I have a suspicion that whoever has any kind of control over this algorithm, which I imagine would be people who are like a lot closer to Matthew Iglesias than me, that they won't have the standpoint that they're discriminating against me. They'll have the standpoint of, well, I'm just in the cast I'm in because that's the right and proper way.
yeah, there'll be a lot of open source models too. I'm not concerned really about it being overly centralized and like, I mean, the creation of the models is necessarily very centralized because I mean the H100 clusters and the amount of money it takes to make like a premier LLM is just, I don't see how there's any way like these decentralized AI things I see in my industry, like in crypto and DeFi. I think there are a lot of buzzwords. I don't think they'll ever truly compete because the centralized LLMs, they get trained on like these huge data centers and insane amounts of information. I just don't see how you ever beat them. But the models can be open sourced after. Like you can download like Llama, like Facebook meta models and a lot of this stuff.
Sure.
So if you release these things in the wild and let people tinker with them or analyze
But,
certain data sets, we can already figure out people's races from pixelated x-rays, like pixelated. And no one has any idea how they do it. No one, all the doctors like, how is it doing this? And it's like, well, it's figuring it out. Isn't that crazy? Imagine what it'll do when it's a little smarter. It's kind of dumb right now. Like it's going to make it. So there's going to be a lot of stuff we figure out once you run it through enough
well, but
recognition
my
that we're
point
going to,
being, you can't red as deep left analysis says, you can't red pill Bill Gates. Like you're not going to show him a different, like a racial differences on group average, like set of charts. And then he's going to go, oh, that's interesting. I've never heard of this before. My point being,
well,
it's
you're not going to do it. You're not going to do it. Oh, I want to qualify that. You won't do that in a prosperous environment. No, you will not red pill Bill Gates in a wealthy environment. You might red pill Gates if he was living in Syria or if he's living in Cuba
inshallah.
where you can't fuck around,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
When you can't fuck around, you can't fuck around and you can't have these luxury little, well, no, everyone's a blank slate, gray goo, and can be an astronaut. Those are only things you can express when it's a social signaling mechanism and when you can say the right things to get the things you want to advance your position in society and when you have enough comfort and enough safety to offer these luxury beliefs out. So the thing I say often, luxury conditions produce luxury beliefs. And you will always find things like that. So that's to me a very it's correct in a very superficial way, and it's not uniquely superficial. Everyone would probably assess it that way, and I think everyone very much discounts how much the environment dictates the expression of those beliefs. And also temperamentally, how you will calibrate it to already think or not think certain moral things that manifest as political things. But you could absolutely red pill Bill Gates if you throw him in a poor environment, for sure. When he doesn't have any social credit to worry about or stuff like that, fuck, you'll learn what Bill Gates really thinks, and you'll learn how Bill Gates wants to survive and prosper and propagate. You're not going to hear that in this environment, so I would never expect him to keep
This
it
is
based. Why would he?
Yeah, this is a good defense of Luigi Mangione that if people start putting more guns to CEOs' heads, we'll find out what they think is what I'm hearing. I'm joking.
Well, I mean, kind of. I mean, from an
Yeah,
environmental standpoint, you can make
sure.
anyone do anything with enough violence, right?
Yeah,
That's
yes.
not an expression of your environment or your temperament. That's just you beating somebody with a stick. Yeah, there's
So
not much to learn from
So
that.
speaking of like, this is a good segue to. I'm not sure if you saw it, but like a month or two ago, I put up a post called "This is what winning looks like." And what it was is there's a guy named Joshua Citarella who's pretty bright. He's definitely a lefty, like very obviously so. He's talking about labor and right-wing ideologies and making fun of monarchism and all of this stuff, which I totally get. But he has this one podcast where he sits down with this guy who calls himself Young Chomsky. He's a podcast
Oh
producer.
God.
Did you watch this, or do you? Are
No,
you
I never heard
familiar?
of any of these guys. I just heard Young Chomsky. I just laughed because I can imagine.
Okay, so I won't throw any shade as my handle's a little ridiculous, but what I'll tell you is it's the two of them sitting down in a white cube. Looks like it's in Manhattan, and they're talking about working out. And I actually think it's great. And they're both like shredded. Like they look good. They're obviously both like drug free. And the one thing that just registers like slightly false is it almost there's like I might be reading too into this, but if people watch, they can litigate whether I'm correct or not. It feels like they want to break off being big and jacked from being really independent and agentic and that kind of politics. And I just like, look, I play bass and guitar and shit like that in these extended range instruments, like the really like low tune, chunky shit. You never see a guy playing shit like that who's built like a twig usually. He's like a guy with like really big
Yeah.
paws. His chest is usually huge, either because he's fat or muscular or both. He looks like he could pick up a boat with you. And their voice is usually low too. In fact, I had a music teacher in school who had this theory that, like, there were exceptions, but basically, you will naturally gravitate and select an instrument that is within the range you can comfortably sing it. Okay. So I'm not even
I get
really a
that.
baritone. I'm really like a bass if I sing. And that's what I
Yeah.
played. But you never see someone with my voice usually who's playing flute or piccolo or like oboe, something
Yeah,
like
yeah. Everything has a valence. Everything
that.
has valence in a way you can't fully appreciate that fits to some temperamental or physical or manifestation of you you might not even be aware of, but subconsciously you're drawn to it from a valence that's just, yeah, there.
So here's my point. Why are these two guys who, forgive my like, slang here, would any other era just be a couple of twinks hanging out at Andy Warhol's warehouse? Why the fuck are they dedicating an hour or two to talking about lifting weights? And I think that's in the zeitgeist. Why are guys needing to lift weights and talk about this shit all of a sudden? And why are left wing people needing to get in on this? And I'm like, well, obviously, it's more dangerous outside, right? They're talking about it like, oh, I want to look like a Greek statue, this, that, whatever. I'm sure that's
Yeah.
like the immediate cause, but the fundamental cause is like, is your walk home so safe, buddy? Like, what would you do if I stood up next to you on the subway? You don't think so?
Yeah. I don't think, and I don't think the nominal reasons are the actual reasons. I don't think it's like I need to get big to protect myself on the subway. I think what they are understanding implicitly is they are absolutely hemorrhaging men as a voting demographic, as especially young men. And they are realizing that there's messaging, political messaging of, hey, vote for, this helps women more, you should vote for it, is not something, basically you
But
can't
these guys put
advocate
their
any
bodies
political
through it.
message that's in men's own interests. It's like almost basically frowned upon on the left and left spectrums to be like, hey, this is good for men, so we want to do this because it's good for you as a man. Like, that's not, like, you are always in a frame of oppressor oppressee, you're the oppressor, you're the one who should give to another dynamic, the minority, the woman, etc. And that message is almost kind of run its course from a political utility perspective. And I simply think you're seeing a shift to the more, let's do the more traditional masculine stuff, because they're realizing that message is starting to decay, and it has a better valence and attractiveness to the male voting demographic that they're losing. So I think it's more of a utility minded messaging thing that
But
they're doing, because they are not faring well with like young male voters.
I think I agree with exactly what you're seeing. I just see it from the other side because these guys personally put their bodies through it for years. They look pretty good, by the way. Props to these guys if they tune in at any point. Respect for what you've done. Extreme talent. I think that if they were just like weekend warriors who like did like Ripeto's program for 3 months and did like a before and after, I would agree. They clearly like have done this for a minute. It would be a very serious commitment if it were like a bit.
Oh yeah, yeah, no, 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 no. I'm not saying these guys' interests are
This
superficial.
is
I'm saying the
these
fact that they're
guys.
now
Yeah.
talking about it and making it really visual and public. It's like one, again, people broach the Overton window shifts based on environmental shifts or based on utility of the
Yes, yes, yes.
thing that
This
you
is
want to
my point.
signal. Okay,
Yeah.
so they're signaling this thing because one, they can sense the environment in their own way. Maybe they don't even consciously aware of this. Maybe it's subconscious. They can tell, hey, the valence this will have if we start talking about this is actually probably will play well. So this thing I'm naturally already interested in, I'm now going to talk about when I might not have talked about it like 4 or 5 years ago. And like imagine during the peak of Me Too, probably
Hmm.
would have never had that conversation. Like some kind of male-minded, let's make you better as a man type thing. But now in this environment, which is shifting more towards a Trumpian, okay, rise of this kind of thing that's okay to be, now the messaging has different utility. So I don't think they're interested in it is like a grift. But I'm
Yeah,
saying
yeah.
that they're expressing that now because the utility of that expression, the signaling mechanism of that expression, has greater utility now in this environment. The environment dictates the expression. The environment dictates the signaling mechanisms that work
Yes.
in your current milieu.
Yeah, yeah. So to that end, I mean, I don't know that I would call this like winning or whatever, but I would just say that, yeah, it's winning. There is this thing that is more of a core competency of the right. And then you just hear these podcasts and they're like, hey, how do we grow a Joe Rogan in our backyard? Like, how do we lift
Oh, oh.
weights? And I'm like, this is really good. This is the way, actually, it sounds like losing, but it's not. This is basically America, like how it's dealt with like a lot of like super cool black guys in the past, where they're like, hey, like, show us how to jump, show us how to dance
Yeah,
and
yeah,
throw a ball and
yeah.
all of this shit. And they're like,
White Man Can't Jump, the movie and stuff like that, right?
yeah, it's this very
No.
aspirational. They don't look at you like you're such a threat anymore. They're like, hey, you're a little swaggy. Like I've noticed, like, you have like kind of like this birth of like rebirth of whatever, like a swaggy white guy. Like my uncle is just the fucking coolest, man. He used to drive a red pickup truck, like a F-150, old, super square. He, carries a gun every day, big fluffy mustache, long fucking flowing mane. He used to just slay pussy all the time. And like that white guy disappeared for like 30 or 40 years, but now he's kind of back. And you can tell there's like a cultural shift, but like, you will never be that like swaggy guy when you are the overdog. It's not possible. And like, so I will be recording about this tomorrow actually, but like I have a lot on the Luigi Mangione assassination. And so much of this is pre-intellectual. I mean, I'm sure you would agree, but like people picking sides here, this is really not a lot of people are not thinking here. They're just like, which one do I side with? Like, what's my vibe? And it basically looks like,
That's any voting, any like
yeah,
forever.
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
agree, but that's
But,
like that's
but,
not unique. It's just
but my
that's how
point
anybody
is
has a
like,
political opinion is really a vibe. And the ones who think it's not a vibe have this like post hoc justification with a bunch of facts they can
of
sprinkle in to
course,
curate a narrative to support the vibe they wanted. It's always a vibe.
it's literally
It's
like,
always
are you on team Michael Scott or team like swaggy white guy bellhop looking figure, like who just pulled out a gun? It's yeah, this is like the whole discourse is retarded, is the way I would phrase it. Yeah, it's stupid.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't really have much of a take on him. I haven't read his manifesto or anything. I think people lash out when they're in very, you can. Have seen some variations of this expression before. I can't think of them explicitly though, but someone's worldview will be heavily, heavily influenced by a lot of, I know I keep circling back to biological, but I'm sorry, like it informs basically everything you think that you are. If someone has a lot of chronic pain or someone's in a lot of depression, I write about this in one a recent essay called "Touching Soul, Touching Senses." Like when you see Picasso's Blue Period, is your thought that like, oh well, he made depressing art and that's what made him depressed, or he was depressed so he made depressing art? Okay, he
yeah,
was
yeah, yeah,
clearly
yeah.
depressed and he made depressing art. His feelings were manifested in his actions with his art. And someone who is in a lot of pain consistently, that absolutely warps a lot of things for you and a lot of like, what do I have to lose type thinking coupled with some sort of morality that skews against, sort of a fairness cheating framework. He definitely has some liberal temperament to him, and he probably is actually more temperamentally liberal than anything else, because he was very fairness, care, harm, moral foundations framework with United Healthcare, and like with insurance companies. He was all care, harm. It would seem to be very much a liberal minded critique, and I'm not saying it was an unfair critique, but it was just very inherently liberal critique.
Well, look at, but also,
That can inform someone to act out like that. So that's just what I see there. I see someone in pain with a very strong temperamental moral conviction that is smart enough to pull something like that off, and you get one-off situations like that.
I'm less interested in what motivated him, and I'm more interested in just the way you talk about this dyad with Republicans and Democrats and or male female voting patterns, the
Yeah.
dyad of who picks who. And like I've noticed like the more likely you are to be a CEO, the more likely you're to be against this, for one. That's obvious. But also like, from my point of view, like which again, like I totally like disavow violence, just again, like
But
I have this expression in a lot of
yeah,
things in life. The more you know, the less you understand. Like the more facts you're introducing, many of them
yeah,
are
Dunning
totally
Kruger,
irrelevant to what the fuck you're talking about. So as
Dunning
you
Kruger, yeah, yeah.
introduce more, you're actually weakening the signal rather than you're overly complicating things. And one thing is the guy just looks like the cartoon you would draw of either boss or dad. And like he's just this like guy who like he stops by at your desk and he's like, hey, your dress code, and he like whispers something about your dress code, or he's like, it's not what you said but how you say it, and you're like, I know you get paid to do this to me. Like you're such a piece of shit. Like
Mm,
everything I said was perfect. Like this person sucks at their
mm,
job. Let's address it
mm,
and make it better or whatever. He looks like that guy. And then you
mm.
have this like young kid who, like, look, I'm that guy. Everyone's been a little too smart for these jobs you get in your 20s. You're mad
Yeah, yeah.
because you're making no fucking money. You're watching people get
Mm.
promoted over you who shouldn't be. And then this happens. But
He didn't have any angst like that, I don't believe, right? He was a pretty successful guy.
he didn't look, man. He comes from a family that is quite wealthy. I mean, I'm shocked anyone in Baltimore has SATs like that, to be honest with you. But
Yeah. He probably was closer to DC, Baltimore is,
yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah. Well, I'm sure he was in the yeah, he was like Owings Mills or wherever the fuck he was. But what I
Yeah,
was going to
yeah.
say is, all this success shit. This is something I think about. Like, I think you've expressed you've had ups and downs with money. Having no money doesn't make you depressed necessarily. Like it can, like
No,
the stock of losing money, having nothing to do will make you become a jihadi. If you,
having no purpose.
yeah, if you are a young male and you cannot stick your dick in someone and you're not doing anything you give a shit about, it doesn't matter if you have $40 million in the bank. Like Osama bin Laden was rich as fuck. Did this stop him from wanting to detonate people?
No, no,
Absolutely.
no. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I talked about this too in an essay called The Volatility Tax Must Be Paid. Um, when you have situations where, and you see this very often, where you reach some kind of degree of success or some sort of nominal goal that you wanted, like some girl expressed online in in a post that went viral on Twitter and Reddit. She's like, she has a good job, she has a boyfriend, she's a great apartment, it has every, like, on paper, flawless life. She's like, is this all life is? I hate it. And it's just like this complete contradiction. Like, you have succeeded on every nominal check the box. I'm a McKinsey consultant. Should this person be happy? Spreadsheet brain frame of analysis, and this person's not happy. And that's because when you transmute volatility into pseudo stability, you're just transmuting volatility to a later time frame, because people just don't operate well in of environments with no friction, environments with no variability, environments that are completely predictable. Like, we like predictability, but when you are subjected to actual raw predictability every single day and there's no variability, even though you have all these comforts and success, people tend to get angsty. They tend to make fake problems, right? Luxury conditions produce luxury beliefs, which produce luxury problems and luxury solutions to real problems. And yeah, that's part of there's a great quote, and I love the quote, and I paraphrase it all the time because I'm not sure how to say it exactly. But it's like, utopia could never come, because if it did, man would destroy it within a day. we become so bored, men would destroy
Yeah,
everything.
sure.
And it speaks to this overall that yeah, kind of informs like what you're talking about. We need this kind of fluctuation. We need the middle. We need the middle class. We need the mid-range jumper. You need a middle. You need some kind
Yeah.
of little dash of spice to existence because if you try to just have these, expected value spreadsheet brain thinking approaches to literally everything, you embed fragility because everyone clusters on the same strategies, and we get frustrated with that, and something breaks eventually.
Yeah, I see it in myself. I see it in people I know who have done really well for themselves. Like, people who they'll buy a massive RV or a ranch. Like, these things have serious upkeep. And these people, they act like they're headaches and they are, but there's this question of, well, who's putting this gun to your head, buddy? But like the truth is, this is actually kind of a noble pursuit of like, well, you make it. Do you want to keep playing life on easy mode, or do you want to level up again? And so you get
Yeah.
this like asset, and it's like that asset, like you buy a chateau in fucking France, like you got to make sure the pipes don't burst. You got to keep things like,
Yeah, yeah. Now you got a job, right? You gave yourself something to do. That's
yeah,
what you wanted.
and
It's
right,
it's
and
a
then
it's a it's a surrogate. One might even call it a surrogate activity for some sort of purpose or productivity that you didn't have before. So you gave yourself a new task because you needed it. So because you're rich,
correct.
successful, so you do stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then what happens is you don't know how to do anything anyway, so you end up employing a bunch of tradesmen and you start a little economy. But like, people
Mm.
criticize that and they're like, how much money does that guy need? I'm like, he's supporting a lot of people with them. Like I have a piece about this. It's like one of my first pieces. It's called You Barely Live Once. And I take a somewhat
Mm.
cheeky angle, which is that we're way too mean to wealthy people. Like we should be nicer. But my point with this is like, look, we have this entire we minted way too many experts who obviously are not particularly expert in anything. They do
Yeah.
they
Yeah,
do
yeah,
have the
yeah,
IQ goods, and also I just have not seen too many places, no pleasant places that just expropriate these people, right? Like holding guns to their heads and shaking them down is going to make them turn guns on us, and we're going to be
yeah.
under authoritarian rule. But like, so how I make a lot of my money is by helping people with health stuff. I train people. I also do body work on them. And my thing I noticed is I just had a poor client fire me. They can't afford me. It sucks. Like they have issues, or if it's not their money, it's like the reason that they're in a precarious position is they have addiction issues or they have family issues or whatever. There's something dysregulating all of their life, which is why they end up in my court. But I can only help them with a little bit. I can't like make their relationship with their mom good or something. That's
Yeah,
outside my,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And my point being, I would actually prefer a lot more of these people who are doing these fake work at home email jobs come to my place and work out with me. In fact, what like many people, like whatever, there's all this discourse about job stacking and all this. I will tell people for sure, there are people running major fucking companies in this country who will come work out in the middle of the fucking workday while they're
Oh
on
yeah.
the clock. Because you know what? The guy's up at 5 a.m. answering emails and shit anyway, and they don't really notice if his thing goes yellow on the clock or whatever, or he runs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If you're a deliverables based job, you don't need to like clock in, and it's on a shift.
I mean, look,
Yeah, I do
every
stuff like
now
that sometimes too.
they got to take a call or something. But my point being,
Yeah.
your ass sitting at home getting Amazon deliveries and Grubhub and whatever, like during your job,
Hmm.
your life is boring. You should go have someone teach you how to play guitar. You should have a trainer or someone, a tennis coach, someone who teaches you how to swim. You should learn how to make pottery. You should develop yourself as a human. But like this
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
spreadsheet bullshit, I'm not trying to take your money away from you. I'm trying to have you share it by making
Mhm.
yourself look. You need a swaggy white guy who can teach you how to do all the shit you never learned, like how to throw a knife or something cool you could pick up girls with. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
but I don't have this like I'm the proletariat, give me your money attitude. My attitude is, hey, a lot of people lives are better because they see me a couple times a week and they tell me that their boss is an asshole or their husband's yelling at them because he's stupid or whatever it is. They blow some smoke out and they get their body moving. But we have this class friction right now that really inhibits this because all the rich people are set on pretending they're not rich and they're all
Signaling.
set on pretending that I am.
Part of that too is an expression of the extremes that are manifesting from frankly from globalism. And I'm not just like mindly playing globalism. Like when I say globalism, I mean like a clustering dominant strategy. And the Gini coefficient has gone up substantially since the early 70s. A
Okay,
lot of
I
other
wanted
metrics
to
that show
hold
median
on, hold on,
income and
hold on,
stuff
hold
like
on.
that.
I want to get into all of this, and I was trying to save it for this part of the podcast so I don't scare the hose. I have a lot of
Okay, I
lovely,
can.
lovely female listeners, and I want to edge them into this. What is the Gini coefficient?
Oh, it's a measure to it's a statistic to measure the degree of inequality in a society. So the larger it is, yeah, the larger it is, the more inequality you have.
Got it.
So it's just a way to measure, like, I forget how it's calculated. It's not a terrible. It's actually, I think, a pretty sophisticated calculation, but it measures by and large pretty accurately degrees of inequality. And I don't mean inequality in like in a liberal way. I mean like there's a big wealth bifurcation, and inequality has definitely gotten large in the U.S. And it is definitely accrued more towards a certain type. And it is to speak to your point, it's made those class distinctions more salient, right? Like it's made certain CEO pays, it's made certain top income earners get more pronounced, and it's made certain middle class people get more and more and more decremented. And when you have that, a very natural human response is of some form of feeling like that's not fair, like you've been cheated, like they took something from me, even if that didn't explicitly happen, even if it wasn't that person that took something from you. The
Yes.
system has evolved in such a way that actually has undermined your ability to prosper like you did in the past. That has absolutely happened. It's happened because of the clustering effects from globalism and what's happened with outsourcing all these things. And a very natural byproduct of that is resentment and things exactly what you're describing there. So I'm just assessing behaviors as to why, from a Darwinian standpoint, from an evolutionary one, from a basic human emotion one, why that would manifest. What caused that? Okay, what the environment changed, right? And that caused that to manifest. The environment dictates the expression of that change. How did that environment change? It changed when we started moving everything abroad, when we started massively expanding state deficit spending. Has coincided with a huge outsourcing of a lot of manufacturing and middle class stuff, and is decimated a lot of earnings potential and median incomes and all kinds of stuff for the quality of living for a large amount of Americans. That environment changed. Now, we had agency over that environment in terms of the globalist decisions we made, but it's not the agency we think we have, right? We can't just write based essays and be like, hey, guys, like, don't be like that. Like, the rich aren't that bad. That doesn't do anything. What'll change that is changing the environment fundamentally from the mechanisms that happened that created those massive dispersions and massive stratifications in societal things. We're getting too extreme, and when you have an extreme economic environment, you tend to get extreme political expressions.
Yeah.
Unsurprisingly, the environment dictates the expression. When it's really poor, people tend to have a certain mindset. When you have a lot of wealth and a lot of power laws of that wealth, yeah, people are going to express that differently. It's just how they are. So really start focusing on the environment that created that will actually yield some productive changes. And I think it will manifest in ways that doesn't is not as political or cultural as we think it is. The culture is an expression of that environment. The culture doesn't create that environment. We have to change the fundamental comfort and well-being of that environment, I think, to make people start to
Yes.
behave more,
The
pleasantly.
Luigi Mangione. Yes. No, my thing probably most closely resembles really pleasant feudalism, which has probably never been. But this is good though, because what I wanted to bridge into while we're in the back half of this is two things that we talked about. But one is the Fed, but I would like to guide
Mm.
this by something I DM'd you about. Is I would even look, I would commission a written piece from you on this, which is if you were going to speak to like, I'll just give you a target blanket audience, like a 50 to 60-year-old CFA or higher credential who is like watching CNBC or Fox Business or reading the Wall Street Journal, and he has like an idea of like what the Fed is and what it does. Could you, if you were speaking to that guy, talk about what are a few things that he thinks it does or he's been told it does, where you could be like, empathetically, I understand how and why you think those things. But having said that, when I step back, if I were a Martian who'd never heard these arguments and I looked at what the thing does versus what you're telling me it does,
True first
where that
principles
gap.
thinking. Yes, that's what you just described, like true first principles thinking.
Yes,
Sorry, was that? Yeah, yeah.
specifically to like a male boomer, like who works in the industry, and he has way more money than you or I, so he thinks he knows
Yeah,
he's correct.
yeah. Yeah.
That's his
Oh
object.
God, yes.
He's not
So how would I
confident
go
because
about? I mean, I would think, I mean, I would advise him to read my essays on that because I do approach this in a very methodical framework that is holistic and that, there are a couple other guys that beat the same drum that I do on the Fed. There's not many, but there are a couple in different ways. But what they tend to do is they tend to focus purely on certain mechanical elements and they tend to try to prove things with charts that you're not going to proselytize or convince anybody with some like statistics or with like, hey, look at this connect. Like it just doesn't work. Okay, once you understand how people come to beliefs, you can start speaking to them, trying to change those beliefs. And the Federal Reserve, what's been fed to these boomers and these CFA types and everyone who watches CNBC, and this is going to sound arrogant to the uninitiated, but I promise you, like this is like a passionate thing of mine that I've spent a lot of time on, and I mean it very literally. Everyone takes everything they're spoon fed from that institution completely unquestioned. And I mean, like your finance professor, I mean your economics professor at Columbia where you went, or whatever fancy smancy school. I don't care. No one goes into like, everyone's like, well, the Fed raised rates, it lowers rates, and there you go. Okay. But after they raise rates, here's what we think what happens. Like, wait. What do you mean raised rates? Like, what happened exactly? Well, they raised rates. Anyway, sorry. Going back to the strike, that's the entire conversation. There's no conversation at all in the substrate there. So the very first thing to try to shake someone's priors here and like punch them in the axioms is to make like be specific. Like if you think they do that, I want you to say exactly with your words what that means and how they did that. Okay, because
yes,
that's a very concrete, provable, falsifiable claim that was made. And you need if you force someone to start then thinking mechanically, you can submit them to start thinking more critically. And basically, how a lot of people understand, let's say, like monetary actions in the Fed, is they don't understand how any of it works really mechanically. But they'll look at they'll look at certain correlations, look at certain charts, and the Fed always operates with a lag. By the way, it never leads. It's amazing how it always manages to lead from the back, right? Oh, they're forward guidance. Forward guidance is the most unfalsifiable God did it claim you could ever find. It's a complete like creationist. I call it monetary creationism. And for those who aren't aware what that term means, forward guidance means, oh, the market did what it did because it's expecting the Fed to do something. It's anticipating what Jerome Powell is thinking he might do. It's front running them. Like it is you're completely robbing this massive economic complex adaptive system of agency and thinking, oh, it's just guessing what the bureaucratic group of 12 will do. They're so powerful. They're the Wizard of Oz. It's front running the buttons they're going to push. It's nonsense. It's complete creationist nonsense. It's an unfalsifiable claim. It's like saying God did it if you're trying to debate young earthers. Like, well, how did this get here? God did it. How about that God did it? Like, it's not something you can argue. That's something they'll rely on very heavily. But going back to my original point here mechanically, a lot of people look at, say, certain things, like they'll say, look at how a car works, right? And you might say someone like, well, to make the car run, I get in the car, I open the door, I put the key in, I turn the key, it starts. I turn the CD player on, and then I drive the car. So clearly, the CD player is making the car run. Okay,
hey,
like
sure.
no, it's not. No, it's fucking not. Like the CD player has nothing to do with the car working. The CD player is just by happenstance. You happen to turn it on most of the time because you want to hear music when you drive. When you understand how this system works, you can begin to see, oh, hey, that's a CD player. That doesn't have anything to do with this. Like, I understand they might have they said that they held a big press conference. They hold very, very ostentatious, flamboyant press conferences that go on 60 Minutes. They'll go on all these little things and tell them, well, we're printing money again. We're doing this again. Um, an institution, there's a well-known saying called, speak softly and carry a big stick. The Federal Reserve is the exact opposite of that. They speak as loudly as humanly possible and have
Yeah.
no fucking stick. And that's why they speak so loudly. That's why they
And
need to have you have these press conferences. If they weren't there, you wouldn't fucking know anything was happening. I promise you, you wouldn't, because nothing's actually happening with what's going on there. So I want to stop and get into maybe some mechanics here if you want to a bit. I'm happy to. But the way I would go about one is really making guys understand how sycophantic you are being, how completely like servile and worshiping of like a government institution when a lot of these guys like the end of the Fed Ron Paul types would be like, ah, fuck the government. Like, you are worshiping, simping for a government
yeah,
institution unthinkingly. I think the right way to kind of process these guys is to smack them across the face and treat it like masculinity training almost. It's like, stop it. Like, this is not God. This is not this is not some kind of omniscient entity. Let's go through this exactly and see what's happening here. And then you can judge how powerful you think this thing is. That I would take sort of an unorthodox approach there, get someone's attention, and then come at them with the mechanics to try and make them listen. Like, okay, whoa, this guy's not just going to like show me a correlation chart and think he showed anything. Like, no, like we need to approach this thing holistically, psychologically and mechanically to
yeah.
really get people to like absorb this shit. So I'll stop there.
You could obviously ask them the question is like, can you look back historically at even the last 30 or 60 years? How long has the Fed been around? Since
like
World War
yeah,
One.
like 1914, 1916,
Thanks,
something like
World War
that.
One. Okay. So,
Yeah.
like, can you show me any time in the history of the Fed where you feel like they just nailed the interest rate and one where they were off? That would be another, like, periods. But to go, I have a mechanical, somewhat technical question. I heard you mention, I think, on Isaac Simpson's The Carousel, or maybe it's something you wrote,
Mm.
that the rate is something to the effect of the interest rate plus GDP. Is that correct?
The interest that's yeah. So and this goes into the Federal Reserve's rate control. The Fed controls rates claims, which
Okay,
they do
before
not.
you answer, I
They
have a
do not control interest rates. And to you, what you wanted to say, the interest rates of mid to longer tier debt, which is the fundamental crux of where like risk rate, which
like
is
a
where
30-year
the
mortgage.
reference rates for loans, the reference rate for credit creation, the reference rates that banks use, the Treasury bond curve. If you add up, and I have done this in my essays, and I'm not the only guy to have done this. There's actually a guy called Irving Fisher that figured this out a long time ago, not in like an anti-Fed kind of approach. He just like was like, oh shit, wow,
He
rates tend to
observed
be
it.
GDP growth plus inflation. You add real GDP growth plus inflation, and lo and fucking behold, that's what the rates tend to be. It is an expression. Interest rates are an expression of a complex adaptive system. They are the cost of information from a complex adaptive system. Interest rates are a signal from that system. They are an output. They are not an input. They are an output. They are not an input from a bureaucratic agency pressing a fucking button, changing that. And if you this is completely incontrovertible that they are a sum of those two things. So taking that observation as absolutely axiomatic and true, and I've made the chart. It's there. It's not an argument. You are then saying, if you think the Fed controls rates, you're saying, I think the Federal Reserve controls the GDP growth and
Yeah.
inflation of a $27 trillion monstrosity with a fucking button that changes overnight. That is the most communist, utopian. Oh
Okay.
my God, the government controls the weather with buttons. Why stop there? Why not just controls the sunshine with buttons? Like, it's amazing. That's an amazing button, man. Like,
This has been
just what?
tried. Yeah.
Yeah.
Several rulers have invented sun gods before, I believe.
Oh,
Um,
dude, yeah. I wrote an essay called The Summoning Circle that did really well on Twitter. I'm going to put it on Substack, drawing analogies from like the rain chants to the Fed stuff.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
a
yeah.
complete parallel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, my observation again. I always plug this ancient problems is like this is a thing in the human psyche, and they're just being opportunistic with where they aim it or what they shoot through it. But
Yeah.
you can't change this about humans. My
No,
question
you
for
can't.
you
You can't.
regarding this is the interest that they're using. Is this like the CPI or is this like some other interest calculate? I'm sorry, inflation
In inflation?
because obviously the CPI books are cooked. But my question would be, are the reason they cook the CPI to fit this model actually, if you get what I'm saying, where are they reverse engineering off of the number we're talking about, which is CPI plus GDP growth Do they have to cook the official CPI number to fit this actually true signal that's shooting through, if that makes sense?
So one, they don't think that's a signal. Like it's not like no, they're not like fitting this. They're not like statistically fitting this to fit what I just said. Most Fed people wouldn't like that observation that come from that milieu. Like that observation takes away agency from their favorite their little demigod institution. So like no, I don't think that's happening. The CPI obviously has shortcomings. The historical inflation data I'm drawing from is historical. It is using CPI stuff largely. It might
Okay.
be have small modifications there, but again, we're looking back to like the 30s. It's not that cooked. Like it's not cooked going back like 100 years.
So
It's reasonably
CPI
accurate. I mean, it's not perfect, but I think we can also tell this should lend it some credibility on the CPI stuff. The fact that these rates, and again, these rates are not something being controlled by the government.
I
They're not
understand.
something being controlled by the Fed. They are literally being controlled by they are the deepest, most liquid market you can imagine. That is a complex adaptive system output. So the fact that that rate is tracking those two things should give CPI doubters a little bit of credibility on that number, that it's not that far off. It's not
Okay.
perfect, but again, the fact that this output, this expression, which I mean, it's like a vital signal. It's like if you go to a doctor and your heartbeat's beating a certain way. It's like if you go there and your blood test shows higher creatinine levels. Like that interest rate should be seen as a vital sign of an economy. They are an output, not an input. So the fact that this output is correlating with those, like that official CPI number, so relatively okay, should lend it a little credibility. I wouldn't shit on it too much.
Okay. That's legit. I had not thought that. So you've convinced me. What I want to do is bring in my word cells a little bit more. And so let's talk about this. First, let's talk about what the Fed does do, if anything, and then I want to segue to another organ of our government, the Supreme Court. What does the
Oh,
Fed?
before you do that, I want to add one more thing, and this is going to be in an essay coming up here. And I did a brief Twitter post on this. And the Fed is the right wing equivalent of end white men. Like it's the same. It's like the same equivalent of that. You have this thing you're pointing to. This is the reason why nothing is good. If we just killed this thing and we could be better off. It is the right wing expression of the liberal, very die sort of anti male, anti white men thing, and white men and the Fed
Yeah.
and white men, like complete synonyms and parallels. I'm sorry. Now to your question,
What does the
which is the
Fed do
Fed.
if it does anything, aside from press conferences?
So I'll start with the nonsense it doesn't do. Then I'll give it some credit for some things it does do, because it doesn't do nothing. Like it does do some things. The things it does do, though, are kind of boring and things you wouldn't really care about. But they're important. But the stuff you do care about, mostly complete bullshit. So the stuff that they do trot out very aggressively, flamboyantly, ostentatiously, show all the charts, quantitative easing. Every base right guy's favorite boogeyman, which is like this synonym for money printing fundamentally. Because when the Fed does that, what it does is it goes onto bank balance sheets and it's a big swap. So it takes the bank's bonds, and the bonds are collateral the bank lends against. The banks like treasuries, they like bonds. They're collateral they use to create credit, to create loans. Banks create the money supply. Banks create 97% of the money in circulation. The other 3% are physical currencies, roughly, and stuff like that, which does come from the Fed. But the actual deposits, the things that consume resources, because money doesn't matter if it can't consume resources. If I printed
Right. I understand.
$100 trillion and buried it 100 feet underground, doesn't matter. Now, the
Yeah.
M2 chart would go nuts. People would lose their minds. But that $100 trillion that's buried 500 feet below ground doesn't matter because it doesn't consume resources. Banks create money that consume resources. So the Fed will play with bank balance sheets. This is the QE, QT thing I'm sure most people have heard about. It is just swapping the bank's bonds for reserves. Reserves are not money. Reserves are interbank settlement tokens used for clerical purposes. Reserves don't do anything
They don't
without a
circulate
bank
at the
deposit.
retail level, for instance.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Okay.
Reserves cannot consume resources
Yeah,
fundamentally.
cool.
Reserves exist as a clearing mechanism on the bank's accounts at the Federal Reserve. So it's an account, literally a check. Like think of it like a it is just a bank's checkings and savings account basically at the Fed. You could just
Sure.
think of it that way. Reserves are just a mechanism for a deposit. If they wanted to create credit, wanted to create a loan, for the deposit to move anywhere, it needs reserves to go with it. So deposits, the bank's credit creation, and for those listening, I am gesturing right now. I'm holding one hand on top of the other. the bank needs to have a viable economic reason to create credit, to create money. Banks create money out of literally thin air. There has been even one guy who's done a study on this to prove it, to see, hey, when you made that loan, where did the money come from? Richard Warner did this. It's like they just marked up, they just made it up. They just
So
literally made it up. So bank
I have a
deposits are
question.
made out of thin air by the bank. Go ahead.
So, okay, so I watched, granted, this is like not, the highest level of discourse, but like maybe a year or two ago, I had seen a bit of Patrick Bet David's show, and he had some guy from the London School of Economics on, this like very posh British guy. And it seemed like they got stuck on this subject of, does an individual bank create money? And
Yes,
I
they
think,
definitely do.
yeah. So not only do I think that because it just makes sense of what you're saying is like you would have to locate it somewhere, right? But the other
No,
issue,
you don't. No, no, it's literally an accounting markup. It's digital.
well, but I'm saying you can localize it to that bank, right? Like if I'm a certain bank location and I lend you $20, the $20 is not coming from another bank, right? You get what I'm saying?
No, no, no. Yes,
That's
yes,
my point.
correct.
Is like you can track the institution. When I say the place, there if there
Mhm.
is one bank that makes the loan, it is originating with that bank. You cannot point your finger at the ether and say that like the federal government or like the air supplied it to you. Your
Yeah,
credit
yeah,
is
yeah, yeah, yeah. And you can see that you can see it on their balance sheets
yeah,
too.
yeah.
And they
So
are constrained, by the way, from just making infinity dollars. They do have constraints. Those do exist.
I
They are
understand.
not reserves. They are not the Fed. They are assets the bank holds. So anyway,
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
let you keep going.
So here's the thing that set me off to this, though, that made me interrogate this at all. Would have let the statement pass and not have even thought of it. They got stuck on it for like a million years, and I immediately thought this guy from the London School of Economics is lying through his fucking teeth. They've been on this too long. Like thou dost protest too much. Is I was like, how is this a fucking thing? Obviously,
He
a
probably
credit
doesn't know.
institution did that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
but
don't think they know. I legitimately think a lot of these guys exist in such an absurd frame that completely disregards the mechanical raw process that like goes to the bank and says, "Hey, where did that come from?" Like, I want you to literally show me the accounts. They don't work in that way. They work in, well, Keynes says when the savings
yes,
rate
yes,
does this,
yes.
this happens. They work in a completely abstract domain, totally unfalsifiable, completely theoretical, and what the textbook tells them. They are not practitioners. They're academics, and they don't look at these things lifting up the hood to see how the car fucking works. They're completely content with the textbook answer that the CD player runs things.
Well, so my argument would be that the London School of Economics writes this religion partially. So my question for you would be, do you think that he or anyone at that institute has a vested interest in this kind of belief, or do you think it just
Yeah.
got ossified into the religion? That is my question.
Yeah. So yes, yes, and no. Yes to your direct question, but no to the underlying connotation that it's intentional.
Yeah,
I actually do not think any of these guys, and I even mean got people at the FOMC. Some guys might know. I feel like Bernanke actually probably knew a lot of what he was doing was bullshit. But like guys like James Bullard, guys like Kashkari, Neil Kashkari, these are FOMC members. They are full on Kool-Aid. There's not a single doubt in their minds. You can just feel it. You can feel that they think I'm a little demigod on the panel of God that presses the button and makes the weather change. Like they
yeah.
definitely think that. So I don't think there's any actually malicious deception going on. I think these guys have all gone to the same 7 schools plus Stanford, same Ivy Leagues plus Stanford. And they've all gone to the same institution. They all have the same inculcation and same kind of frameworks they've been spoon fed. Same with the LSC, same with this guy that again, why would you think any differently? These are not necessarily very novel thinkers. Okay, I'm sorry. Like you fundamentally your entire process of leveling up has been answering studies and tests based off what the textbook says. Did you give the right answer? Okay. It's not did you come up with a new framework to undermine the entire nature of this thing? That doesn't get rewarded in college.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
one, I don't think they're oh, I want to hold on, let me finish. So I don't think they're lying. But I do think if exposed to what I am saying and demonstrating, there would be a massive aversion to even listening to it because if they internalize that, it undermines and just it destroys their whole personality and essence and worldview. It'd be very painful because it would That's why I don't expect any sort of reception from that type of person, because they're
Sure.
just going to be completely from like motivated reasoning, totally unreceptive to it, because it is deeply unkind to almost all of their presuppositions about how a complex adaptive system, how an economy, how interest rates, how money creation actually works. So yeah, I don't expect them to be receptive, but I also don't think they're being intentionally deceptive.
Yeah, that's a good observation. I guess the reason I asked that question, where that motivation's coming from with me, is like so I used to work in hotels in DC, so I'd meet like lobbyists or whatever. You could legitimately sit down with any lobbyist for say like alcohol, tobacco, firearms, fucking
Mm.
pharmaceutical. It doesn't matter. They're just armed to the teeth with incredible data points, great talking
Oh, of course.
they're
Yeah.
wizard rhetoricians. And my point
Yeah.
being,
Yeah.
a lot of it's
Look at this
true.
chart I have, right? Yeah.
Yes, and my point being, when you're a third party and you don't know enough about something, the guys you're talking about from like the Fed are indiscernible from like tobacco lobbyists, or you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not impugning either of them. They're both telling the truth. It's just they're being like a little selective with their vision.
Oh,
Um,
of course, of course. Everyone does that with facts, though. That's not unique to them. Like everyone will curate facts in service of a narrative they want to promote, and the facts aren't necessarily wrong. To your point, I wrote about this in a piece called Yarvin, Rufo, and Endless Factual Sediment. People who have high verbal IQ and are skilled politically are very good at curating sets of facts to service their narrative. Now, the
yeah,
narrative is something they already wanted to believe because it's predicated on a moral framework. It's not hard to go find facts, and real facts, by the way, that are in service of that narrative. The
sure.
thing is, you're curating a select facts that fit that narrative. This is not a holistic, let's be fair mindset. So they can show these data points very convincing, right? They're like, oh my, and to the uninitiated, you don't know enough to push back on these things. Like, wow, this guy's really done his research. No matter what the discourse, it mostly political, any kind of anything that has a moral framework to it, people will use motivated reasoning to curate facts to create the justification for that. So lobbyists would be pros at it because that is the creme de la creme of high verbal IQ, advocating my interest type people. So
Yeah.
they're going to be like almost impenetrable from that way. But when you see past those facts is simply just post hoc justifications for their interests and the narrative, you begin to contextualize them a little bit better, and you can understand a bit of the language being spoken there. It's not just facts. People aren't lacking facts. People are taking facts to create, to advance something they want to advance.
Okay, so bringing in my word cell people more, I want to take a different organ, the Supreme Court, and you don't have to track it that much, I think, to be able to do this exercise. Is what do you think the Supreme Court says it does versus what it actually does? Because I don't think those are the same thing.
So the Supreme Court would nominally be a third part of the separation of powers, formalized in like Marbury versus Madison, that
Yes.
codified judicial review as like, okay, this is an equally powerful part of the government, and the Congress and executive branch, legislative and executive, must abide by these sort of things to keep them all in check. And it does this by virtue of interpreting disagreements that it curates very specifically because it gets to review any that it takes, and reviews them in relation to the Constitution, meaning the structure of the United States, because Constitution fundamentally means structure. Like that's what it's meant to be. The Constitution is not meant to be this overarching, completely comprehensive thing and it's not meant to evolve. By definition, it's meant to actually provide structure that doesn't change unless you democratically want it to. Nothing about the Supreme Court is even a little bit democratic, not even a bit. Okay. So, like these democracy lovers and protected democracy, it's like, want the Supreme Court to change laws. That's not a democratic institution whatsoever, fucking never. It's an appointed one where they serve life terms. Nothing about that's there. To change a law democratically, oftentimes the Constitution doesn't actually stop you. For instance, the Constitution does not restrict abortion, it just doesn't enshrine abortion. It's
Right.
not there. You can flip it upside down, shake it all you want. It's not fucking there. No one thought it was there for like 100 years or well over that. And abortion was a crime all throughout that time, clearly demonstrating the fact that this was constitutional and everyone thought that. And when the Constitution was written, that's just how it is. Now, you can still democratically change the law if you want to update it in that way, but the Constitution is not built to be updated. Laws can be updated. The Constitution is built to provide structure as things are updated and changed to make sure you keep a republic, roughly speaking, at hand. So it's not just mindless majority rule and what have you. You actually have a republic. So the Supreme Court would nominally and literally, like it doesn't like I'm not saying it doesn't do this, but it should interpret laws as understood by the Constitution to understand whether or not they are constitutional, and if they're not, then they're illegal, and then they get struck down. That is what they do. Uh, a lot of judges on there are activists, though. They are appointed to basically express their own value expressions, not so much the originalist intent of what the law was meant to be when it was written, how it was understood when it was written. There's a lot of ways to figure this out. It's not a perfect science, obviously, but if you're going into it with the mindset of it's not what I think, it's what the people who wrote it at that time think, because that's what a law is. It's not what the judge makes it up to be, because then you're just legislating from the bench. If you go in with that mindset, which every judge should, then you are applying the Constitution as written and as expressed by the founding fathers and the government. That's what it should be. The court is increasingly not originalist, though. Even the conservatives on the court are. I don't even know I don't know what uh, what's the other Italian guy on there? I forget his name. Not Scalia died. I forget the
Alito.
other guy's name. That's it. Alito. There you go. I don't even know what he is actually. And
People don't know who
Thomas
the
is a
fuck
genuine
Ruth Bader
originalist.
Ginsburg is. They thought she was like a candle or something you get out of.
He's a living constitutionalist. He's just vibes.
But my being like,
And that's a little dismissive, but like the good thing about originalists though is they should sometimes hate their rulings. You should hate your rulings sometimes. You should think this is not right from a personal standpoint, but the law as applied based off this originalist interpretation makes it such. A great example of this was the flag burning case, I think in 91 with Scalia. He actually voted with the liberals saying flag burning is free speech. Like, just because it wasn't words, just because it wasn't this, clearly speech is expressed in more than just words and written. Burning your own flag is a form of that expression if it's your own. It's not unconstitutional. He's like, I hate that ruling, though. He's like, I hated it, but that is what speech, that's what the Second Amendment was. Sorry, that's what the First Amendment means. You should not like some of your rulings. The living constitutionalists, there's no reason they should ever hate any of their rulings because it's just a moral expression of what they think it should be. So the Supreme Court is basically trying to apply constitutional law to the laws, the legislative bodies of the U.S. And after they do that ruling, the legislative body should incorporate it and actually listen to it. Now, whether or not they do is an entirely separate matter. In a lot of cases, like with the recent affirmative action thing that was struck down, that's still happening. So, like, how enforceable a lot of their stuff is, I think, is starting to be a little bit of a concern. Um,
so
but anyway, that's what they're supposed to do. I'll stop there.
let me ask you this question. Okay, so hypothetically, I'm going to tie this back into what we're talking about. Let's say you have two warring armies. You have a French army and a German army, for sake of argument, and they end up clashing, and a hostage situation occurs where we'll say the Germans surround a bunch of the French guys and they give them an ultimatum. We can slit your throats or you can join us and we're going to go back in and we're going to go fuck up your former teammates. A certain amount of the French guys say fuck it, slit our throats, and the remaining ones click up with the German guys. Those guys who used to fight against the Germans are now fighting with the Germans. Would you still distinguish them as French soldiers, or would you say they're basically like the Foreign Legion of the German army?
It would depend on the vantage point of how I'm seeing them. If I'm German, they are part of the French army now. If I'm German, they are French within my army that I
Okay,
probably
cool.
don't hold in as high a regard as I do the true German. So I think that entirely depends on this vantage point and the strategic impact they would have on you.
Okay, so let's say time passes, and over the coming weeks, those French guys who joined the German army, they body a bunch of French guys. They kill them. From a utilitarian standpoint, if you're just looking at who are they killing and who are they protecting, they're basically functioning as a part of that German army organism, right? Regardless of what they believe, where they were born, whatever. From the
Mm.
larger organism that's the military rather than the individual, you would argue that they're basically serving the German government, right?
Mm.
So
Yeah.
my argument would be it's kind of irrelevant whether an individual judge is conservative or liberal or anything in between. My argument for the Supreme Court is that it is, people think it's like, again, it's just like the Vatican, where a bunch of guys in robes go in, they release smoke out the top, and then we figure out what's going to happen. But what I think it
Mm.
actually is an iOS update, in that the way it works is that you have people who agitate for certain things. If we go back in time, you could say one plank of feminism that ended up occurring, whether it was intended or not, was to basically double the size of the workforce. And I can't help but
Yeah.
notice that right before we do it, we have women absolutely chimping for this thing to happen to them, which when you come into the future, they have a couple complaints about it, I've noticed. And so
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
very suspicious where you're like, huh, just like you were saying, where the Fed is leading, you're like, well, are the feminists leading, or are they downstream of technological and cultural shifts that are about to happen to them? But they're made to think that they're winning. And so similarly, you
Yeah.
see something like Roe versus Wade, which basically makes it way easier to make a woman a battery for like GlaxoSmithKline, and like she may
Mhm.
also be like a meat battery too. She may also have kids, but like we're
Right, right,
really into that GDP optimization. And so we're going
right,
to make
right,
it very easy for her to seamlessly get her ass back at the office
right, right. You
after.
notice how much corporations will definitely give like they're very liberal on like abortion
Dude,
part of healthcare and stuff like that. Very
they'll
coincidentally,
airdrop
right?
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll fucking slow the car down, roll you straight into one of those Planned Parenthoods, and then they'll pick you back up. So my
Yeah.
point being, it's an iOS update, and the way it works is it's a lagging indicator of what's like. I mean, it like instantiates it, but actually, there's first a political movement. It's almost like a color revolution is set, where there's a bunch of
Mm,
propaganda. We agitate for something like, say, gay marriage, and we
mm.
keep going through the Constitution looking for it, and we're shaking it, and we're like, where the fuck is this thing?
Right, right,
And
right,
we go, hey,
right.
it was a squeaker. It's only five of these nine people. But guess what? Whether you like it or not, do you know what you can never do with your iPhone? Or maybe you can, and I'm wrong. I don't think you can go back to old updates. Like whatever iOS update they just jammed down my throat that changed all the icons. I don't have an
Mm.
option to go back to like I don't know, 2012, whatever my iPhone looked like back then.
Yeah, yeah.
It only ratchets one way.
Well, it only ratchets one way in certain environments, in prosperous environments. So Cthulhu swims left. This is part of the biofoundationalism thing. Cthulhu swims left in prosperity because he has nowhere else to go. Like you'll
Yeah,
get
I mean,
more conservative and wealth. It has a lower utility function.
I
But then
think
you get so liberal, you start embedding entropy, and you started completely issuing order, completely
well,
forgetting the masculine moral foundations, and then you just get entropy, and that's what makes it reset.
yes, 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 yes. But a correction there. I don't think it would happen through the Supreme Court. It would happen through nullifying it. Like this is what Netanyahu was trying to do in Israel,
Yeah,
right? Before
maybe
he popped
I
off.
could see that. Yeah.
Because so to go to your idea of like,
Law and order is the most structurally hierarchical order instilling thing possible. So it would make complete sense to undermine the judiciary when you're in like late stage hyper moralization on the feminine liberal axis, just creeping because you're just so left. You have no completely disregarding order. The first thing you'd kill off is like respecting the legal system.
yes, 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 yes. But to go back to what you're talking about, foundationalism, is I would argue that the court, if it's doing any of this judicial review nonsense or what it's weaponized that like that way whatsoever, that is basically a liberal tendency organ. And that
What's a liberal tendency, Oregon?
the Supreme Court as an organ, let's say it were like a body or an engine, and let's say,
Uh,
or your body, right? You have fast twitch and slow twitch muscles, and there's gradations and things, but you have a mix in each muscle for the most part. And my argument is that the Supreme Court, as an organ, will always skew liberal. In that, even if you wanted to have like a monarchy or whatever the fuck you're doing, something more authoritarian, the very idea of deferring outside of your own wisdom formally in this fashion, if it's not behind closed doors, that it is a liberal organ. And the reason I'll argue it's liberal is a liberal tactic or a Cthulhu left wing tactic is that you look for disagreements, and every disagreement, every conflict is an opportunity for power. And so the very idea that you're even having someone review, say like how you did, this is how HR works at your job, right? If you had an office job, a job, what would happen is occasionally there would be some kind of conflict. In fact, there may be none. There may be a false flag where someone just makes up you said something, they didn't like your tone of voice, whatever the fuck it was, and all of a sudden HR comes in. And fundamentally, this is already an opening for this to not go your way. So what you would want to do is just strip HR out, period, and say, well, this is a startup. There's 8 of us and we're here to work. If you don't like it, get the fuck out and we'll send your last paycheck to you. And like the
Hmm.
Supreme Court as an organ to even have a court, like there's a reason I don't think we had Supreme Courts prior to the US really, right?
I don't know when Marbury versus Madison became. Well, I forget when that was passed. I think it was in the
Oh,
1800s.
but forget that. But I'm saying even predating that, like you don't go back to like the Tudor monarchy or something or ancient Rome, and you're like,
Oh,
well,
oh.
the guys in the robes,
Yeah, but
that's
but
like,
I
we
don't
can't
I
do
don't
that.
know if we really draw from. Yeah, but drawing from that, like drawing from European models, like they don't believe in separation of powers, like at all. Like their prime minister is just a creature of parliament. That's why they just pick him, and they can do a no confidence vote and kick him out if he's not doing what he's told. The senates are mostly honorific, like France's Senate, Italy's Senate, like they're just honorific. So like the European countries just have not believed in this decentralization, the separation of powers, and I think that's one of the by far most noble and admirable traits of the U.S. government that is being slowly trying to be eroded by a leftist frame of mind, a more, a creeping left sort of mentality that wants to us consolidate power to advance positioning that just keeps pushing left with its overall tendency. And by the way, when I see leftward movements, I'm not talking year to year. I've seen some guys, I feel like they assess things in like, movements that look at like again like 1 or 3 or 4 years. I'm saying look at the election chart in 1984 when Reagan was elected, like 49 states. Then look at yourself 15 years later. Okay, you didn't get more conservative. Look at what Enoch Powell's popularity in Britain. I think he had like 70% approval. He was very popular, very popular. Where look at you 10, 20 years later. Look at Brexit. I'm sorry, the UK has not gotten more base since Brexit.
I mean, you're,
So it's
you're,
like
you're
these movements are seen in 10 to 15-year chunks.
you're playing small
Um,
ball. Look at how a liberal person from the 1960s speaks on camera,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
listen
yeah.
to them
Trump
now.
is a true like 1980s liberal, by the way. He's a Democrat from the 80s standards. He hasn't changed.
I mean,
I've
yeah,
listened to
you,
all
you,
his
you
old
could
conversations.
always.
The dude is the same guy, the same guy. It really is the party's fundamental like preferences that have shifted that makes him conservative now. He's not a temperamental conservative. He really is like actually an 80s Democrat.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, this is like the same thing. You could do basically the reverse with the Cuomos. Like, is there anyone looking at like Chris Cuomo on HRT doing like yo-yo, grabbing his nuts and being like, this is a constitutionally progressive human being who really cares a lot
yeah,
about harm and you're like, what the fuck is happening
yeah,
here? It's all
yeah, yeah.
fake, obviously.
To touch on your Supreme Court statement, though, um, I think that's actually probably the least liberal of all of the
Oh, sure.
bodies.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's
It is all of these institutions have crept left, and they will continue to creep left so long as we have comfort. Too much comfort. As things get harder, though, I fully expect them to push more right. But the Supreme Court is kind of the most immune from it. I mean, it has the lowest amount of members. It's the president basically dictates who gets put in. Now, I would fully expect as things trend more leftwards that the people he puts into the court are perhaps more and more sympathetic to a living constitution mindset and are not as staunchly originalist. So I would expect it to creep somewhat the same direction overall as the broader government, but not uniquely so, and maybe even probably the least immune to that, just by virtue of the fact that the appointments are lifetime. So, like someone appointed in the 70s, I mean, Scalia was appointed by Reagan. He just died, like, I think like 7 years ago. A lot of appointments that were like George Bush one or something. So it's like that replacement factor is slow. So that means these people are existing in an older frame where
yeah.
they are almost certainly to be more conservative because of that. So I just because of the lifetime appointments, I think they'd probably be the most immune to creeping left, though I do expect it to do that over a long enough timeline.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's like a chief concern of mine. I don't even pay attention to the nominations or anything like that other than the Kavanaugh one. And obviously, I'm familiar with the Clarence Thomas process from many years ago. But
No, yeah, yeah.
the main reason
Thomas
I
is
bring
great.
it up is it's like, maybe I should do a piece on this, but like, I like Garvin a lot. He's taken some licks lately, but like basically, like all in, I like his style of thinking, which is like, what does the thing say it is and what does it actually do? And those are rarely
Mm,
the same thing, obviously. Um,
mm.
but I guess. I don't know. I think that ties up a lot. In jest, I joked about how like Jurassic Park is basically a parable about biofoundationalism, where it like asks a question of, as you said, what happens if you skew a society too male or too female? Well, in the beginning of Jurassic Park, they tell you they use all female dinosaurs, and then they just eat everyone, which is super gangster. But
I
yeah, you
don't
can't.
remember Jurassic Park. It's been a very long time since I've seen it. The expression of these moral foundations, though, is not necessarily completely correlated with the sex. Though, I mean, if you look at the voting patterns, women definitely skew much more liberal in their moral foundations. But it's not like to say one is masculine or masculine minded or feminine minded or politically masculine, politically feminine. That doesn't necessarily mean the politically masculine only manifests in men. Like it is variable. It does express in men and women,
Oh,
more
sure.
so in men on the right, more so on women on the left, and you could just see that in like if you ask them, if you do basic polling, observe what their interests are in even. But yeah, I just want to clarify that. I also want to reemphasize too when I say like politically feminine, I'm not saying it even remotely disparagingly. Like I'm really not. I'm saying it from the context of a diet. Like I'm not calling liberals like something negative or cuckery or anything like that. I do think the best expression is a balanced one. And I do think the most healthy environment has productively antagonistic forces on both sides, having a solid expression to keep neither from hyper moralizing the other and having them only focus on the moral foundations that they hold highest. And we're seeing that in the West now. We're hyper moralized. That's a term I made up, by the way, hyper moralization. And that means you're just hyper focused on one or two moral foundations. So the West is like hyper moralized on the feminine axis of care, fairness, cheating, and care harm, like helping minorities, this refugees, is this fair, taxing? These are luxury concerns you can have in a prosperous environment. And we're getting so far left and comfortable that we're only focusing on those things. We're eschewing order. And when you eschew order too much, you embed entropy definitionally. And that's what causes eventually the blowback because too much entropy was like, oh shit, we need conservative moral foundations again. And that's what causes the rise of that utility of those beliefs fundamentally.
Yeah. So I'll tell you before we close, one of the reasons why I like your writing and how you think is you are applying things on a larger scale that I see on a smaller scale in my real life. So I see the trajectory between the two. So I'll tell you a couple things about my real life is, I do okay for myself. And so we've had 2 to 3 indoor house cats over the last few years. But my wife is like a super sweet lady. She's a nurse, and she has that like care gene in her. And so, you feed 1 or 2 outside cats, and sooner or later they accrue. So we have 2 indoor boys who are real big, but we have 6 outdoor cats right now. All of them have been
Right.
fixed. They got their shots. We feed them a lot of food. We give them water. So I see that, but fundamentally, it's my job to kind of like figure out the resource getting them in. And then, like, am I really going to have like a real argument with my wife about we cannot possibly feed a ninth or 10th? Like, that's not realistic. Of course, like, I can
Right, right,
see how it's going to go, and I'm okay with that because I see the pattern before we get there. But I'll tell you,
right.
this is an insight into how I think. You wrote a great piece called Gain Dependence, Gain Power. Okay.
Mm.
And I really wish that more people of all political stripes thought this way so that they could at least see it. And like, you can think this is good or you can think it's bad, but at minimal, you should see the dynamic and how it works. But I live in a somewhat dicey part of town. It's not the worst, but I have this nice little fixer upper house. And I think nothing sends a better signal of don't fuck with this house and having a huge fence or a wall, whatever it is. But like you can have all your Ring doorbell and fancy new shit. It can all get hacked, but medieval technology is Lindy and it works. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Where I
Mm,
live, you are rate limited on how high you can make a fence, except if you pay a bunch of money for a permit and good fortune shines down on you. And
mm,
so everyone told me not to bother, but I filed a permit with my city and I got a big, massive, like 9 foot tall fence and I painted that fucker dark, dark black and it sends a little bit of a
mm,
message. Now, I have this problem. I have neighbors on either side of me. They don't want to pay for that shit, and they don't want something that big, would be my guess. So
mm.
I went around to them and I said, guess what? It's time for a new fence. And I know that whoever lives next to you normally hits you up for money for this thing. I'll take care of it. And I didn't tell them what I was going to do. And I put up this, they had electrical they put on my fence on the other side that they're not allowed to do. I paid for it to get taken off and put back in. But when this thing was done, it was done. And there's nothing these people could do about it. And
Mm.
my point being, I was very deliberately removing any financial obligation they had in this thing so that they became dependent on it. And once they were dependent,
Mm.
I said, well, guess what? You don't really get a say in how tall this thing is or what color it is. Now you can deal with it. In truth, I think they're mostly jealous, and that when they need to reconstruct the other parts of their house, they're going to want to try to get it as high. But the point being, I just saw this in immediately, and I said, no, 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 I'll take care of it financially, but you don't get to vote here. And I think that more people should look at the world in these terms and realize that when someone's offering you something, they're also taking something from you. And you should be more cautious with it, or potentially you should be a more generous human if you want to get things out of people, and you should offer to pay for shit for them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, reciprocity is a one of the most powerful kind of understood, embodied expressions people can have. So, yeah, the game dependence, game power one is speaking about the fundamental game theoretic flaws of every vote counts the same democracy. It invariably devolves to a bidding war for votes once you have the wealth to do so. The essay breaks this down, and also another essay called "We'll Give You Things," and then a greater than sign "We'll Leave You Alone." Is fundamentally similar. That's more philosophical, and gain dependence, gain power infuses economic information to reinforce it. It's just, again, looks at things over large and long timelines, like 100-year timelines. Like, look how these things have moved. This is very clearly a dominant strategy. Let's discuss what it means when an economic policy works. People have very superficial, naive ways of assessing that. I just like I can't believe that. Like I see discourse from like people who and higher. I guess I can believe it. I mean, I don't mean to like talk down to people, but when I see like analysis of rent controls from people, like I can't believe Kamala is talking about rent controls or capital gains, unrealized capital gains tax. This won't work. Here's a study. Here's a breakdown. It's like you're not even remotely speaking the same language of why that's touted out. That is
Exactly.
trotted
It
out
was wild.
to express that one, you deserve more than you have, and I'm going to give that to you in some way. This policy will give you more. I will redistribute resources from them to you, and you deserve that. That message sells very fucking well. That works. That's working. And secondly, what that also does is it gains dependence. Because if you now get certain price controls or certain handouts or certain things from me because of what I'm doing, even if I'm causing a bunch of other problems somewhere else, one, the attribution is very hard. How do you know I'm causing all these other problems? Well, look, I can show you this chart that says this is working or this, this is fine. You can gain dependence with these sort of mechanisms that grows your constituency, grows your dependent base, grows your voting base. Because the best way to have a loyal voting base is to have loyal people receiving loyal, handouts. I'm not going to vote against the hand that feeds me. So the expression of that message is fundamentally, you deserve more, and I will give that to you. And this
Okay.
policy will achieve that. And that policy works if it gets you elected. That's what working means. People need to understand what the utility of political stances and messages are. It is not some economic study showing that rent controls don't work. Obviously, they don't fucking work. I am not defending or advocating for rent controls here on a thinking person's axis. I am discussing the game theoretic adoption views of why you keep hearing nonsense things like taxing unrealized capital gains. It's a signaling mechanism for constituency, and it gains dependence invariably because it grows the size of government, grows the transfer payments, which have gone absolutely like parabolic. They've grown 4 times faster than any other kind of income. It's very obvious what's happening, and people need to see this more from a functional standpoint, not like here's a political analysis about why XYZ doesn't comport well with this McKinsey study I have. Completely useless.
Okay, speed round real quick before I have to run. Now we're like, I feel like we're finally getting cooking, so we'll have to do another one at some point. Okay, I don't know if you thought I did a Trump's first 100 days that had a lot of great ideas in it, including Department of RFK. I saw you recently did an RFK post
A
on
fun one, yeah.
his vision
Yeah.
for, well, yeah, I mean, look, all my posts are fun too. Trump's first 100 days. So I have an idea in there where we start a new cryptocurrency. Some people call it barons, or you could look at it as like US abortion coin. But basically, the way it works is we mint a new coin that you can hold, but it also so happens to be the only coin that you can use to pay for an abortion in this country. And then we get buy-in from women on DeFi. What do you think? There's one crypto
It sounds,
you can only use this thing to get an abortion. I think we could spend it pretty high. What do you think?
I mean, I think it sounds fun. I think it would probably have good pumpamentals and mimetic ability, perhaps. There's not a ghost chance, there's not a snowball's chance in hell it'll actually like act as currency to Planned Parenthood or they'll like make you do that. But yeah, no,
Are
why
you
not?
going to
Like
say they're not as
there have
good
been
as math,
sillier
or
things that have what's that?
I said, are you impugning their abilities to do math, sir? Why?
No, it's like the
The whole
only thing you
wallet
can use to pay
situation would
for
be
it.
such a fucking
Yeah.
mess. Can you imagine? It would not be good. But I think I'm gonna keep swinging. I think the Hawk Tuah girl got one, so I'm gonna work on getting Barons off the ground. Maybe we'll do it on Salutary. You help me pump this thing.
Oh, yeah. That's a
Um,
project I'm working on for anyone DeFi inclined or crypto or even financially related. I have a finance background, and this actually draws from a lot of historical financial observations and has is being applied to crypto, but in a very serious way. If you have any inclination or interest in intense forms of value control, mergers and acquisitions, financial history, please feel free to reach out to me. It doesn't matter what, investors, projects, you just want to learn more. I love talking about this stuff. So just throwing that out there.
do you have a place for some of my listeners definitely have money and are definitely making money. I've had people DM me asking me for some finance tips, and I always identify I know enough to do okay, but I don't legally give out any advice. If
Right.
do you are you a do you have a home for people who are like, hey, I'm sitting on a bunch of money, can you help me invest it?
I mean, my overall mindset there would be, again, with the not financial advice qualifier, I'll just tell you what I'm doing. I think there's a Nassim Taleb quote that's like, don't tell me your opinions, show me your portfolio. Then I'll know
Okay.
what you really think. So, I mean, I am a lot of ETH. Ethereum is a very productivity minded crypto. And by the way, I hate the term cryptocurrency, just on the side. A lot of these things are not trying to be currencies. They're assets. They're assets. They're debts. They're forms of claims on resources. Some of them are currencies, but kind of not really because the ones they call currencies aren't really stable. The only thing that's really a currency is a stable coin. Um, Tangent there, but yeah, current cryptocurrency is extremely misleading and a kind of a misnomer. It's a complete misnomer. So I own ETH because you could just conceptualize it as the Nasdaq of crypto. Is an easy way to understand ETH. It's a thing that people build on and build a lot of businesses and services. It's like farmland. It's something you buy because it does something. I
Yeah.
don't own any Bitcoin right now because Bitcoin is like gold. Gold is not a productive resource. It's something you own to own it. It's something you own because you think other people will think it's valuable. You can't really do anything with it besides you can buy things with it. You can move your Bitcoin around. It's just kind of clunky to do it. But so anyway, I'm not disparaging Bitcoin. I'm just not a gold investor by temperament. I'm a technology investor. I like investing in productive assets that I can like look at their fundamentals and see that they're growing in a way that provides value to people.
Yeah, yeah.
So
My
Ethereum,
question is, if someone like, I guess my point being, is it going to be annoying to you if any of my listeners are like, "Hey, I'm interested in what you're doing over at Salutary, and I have some money. Do these things fit together?" Or
no. Questions, the only way you learn is by reaching out and asking. So no, not at all.
Cool.
So yeah, a lot of ETH and some crypto like that, and semiconductors. I'm a big fan of semiconductors because I'm a big believer in AI and compute growth as a asset, as a class, as a everything. So I own the bulwark of how that works with a lot of semiconductor companies. And yeah, people have questions or like stuff related to crypto. Happy to discuss these things. And if you are looking to allocate money, I mean, I'm looking for very like selective investment. I don't want a lot of investors, and I don't want I'm being picky about it. So like I would love to talk though. And if you have like a particular curiosity or skill set that aligns with what you've heard here, or certain like a very nuanced thing as it pertains to crypto, this what I'm doing is both unusual and also known. I call it an old new idea, fundamentally, kind of what I'm building, because it draws a lot on history, but it would feel unusual when applied today. So it's kind of Talebian in that concept. Like I'm looking to like, uh, old concepts of moral hazard, basically, and be like,
Yeah.
hey, look at this. It's like, whoa, that's crazy, but it's not. It's an old known concept that people have kind of moved away from. Is I think kind of the driving ethos of it. So
Cool. Interesting. Well, this has definitely been like my most all over the place podcast to date, I think. So it's been a lot of fun. Um,
victory.
yeah, for
I
sure.
get that. Yeah, I get that a fair amount. So
Um, yeah, but for my listeners, no joke. I've read a lot of your stuff. I didn't read your entire back catalog, but I went in through quite a few. And obviously, I read your current stuff. But you're one of my favorite posters. I really liked your podcast with Alex Kashuda. I like hearing you speak to, like, it's cool hearing you speak to Isaac, obviously, but I love in general hearing people speak with different personalities or people that you might not necessarily normally hear, like overhear a conversation with them. But I thought that one was
yeah, yeah,
quite good.
yeah. I love the one with Alex. She was really well prepared and like asked some really insightful ones as related to like biofoundationalism and some of the other stuff. So that was fun. I was happy she reached out.
Cool.
Same with you. I love you. Like you have a great personality. Like just shines through in everything you write. Like it just has this valence and warmth, but yet intellectual seriousness to it too. That just makes it fun to read and like you want to hear and see where you're going and like consume it also.
Thank you. I appreciate it. We'll see how it goes. I'm just past like my first 6 or 7 months here on Substack, but it's growing. But thank you for your time. I'll DM you later, and I'm gonna go run make some money. Thanks a lot, man.
There we go. Yeah, and before you go, by the way, my Substack, the dosage makes it so, and you can find me on Twitter at Back the Bunny, and that's my handle on Substack too. So, all
Hell yeah. I'm gonna link all of that stuff in the show notes, and I'll talk to you later, man.
right, sounds good. Bye, man.
Cool. Peace.